The first week of college is supposed to be unforgettable for the right reasons. New faces, new independence, the feeling that your life is finally moving forward. For most students around me, that's exactly what it was. For me, it felt like walking into a locked room where everyone else already had the key. I remember standing in the middle of campus, watching students move with confidence, holding printed schedules, laughing with people they had met during orientation. Some of them wore their student ID cards proudly, like proof that they belonged there. And then there was me, empty-handed, confused, and silently panicking. I didn't know which building to go to. I didn't know which class I was supposed to attend. I didn't even know where to start asking for help. When a professor finally looked at me and said, "Orientation was last week, you're already behind," I felt my chest tighten. In that moment, I wasn't just lost, I was judged. People didn't see someone struggling, they saw someone careless, someone irresponsible, someone who didn't take college seriously. What none of them knew was that I didn't miss orientation because I was lazy. I missed it because my own brother deleted every single email my college ever sent me. Growing up, I was always labeled as the focused one, the student teachers praised, the child relatives used as an example. My report cards were discussed at dinner tables, my grades announced proudly to people who barely knew me. I didn't chase perfection, but I chased consistency. I studied because I wanted stability, independence, a future where I wouldn't have to depend on anyone. My brother, on the other hand, grew up hearing my name right next to his, always in comparison. If I brought home an award, he brought home silence. If a teacher complimented me, someone would ask him why he wasn't doing the same. No one noticed how those comparisons slowly carved resentment into him. No one realized that every "why can't you be more like her" pushed him a little further away from me. At home, the dynamic was complicated. My parents were proud, but their pride often came with pressure. Sometimes they celebrated me too loudly. Other times, they unintentionally used me as a measuring stick for my brother. I never wanted that role. I tried to balance it by being supportive. I helped him with assignments when I could. I listened when he complained about feeling stuck. I defended him when relatives criticized his lack of direction. In my mind, family meant loyalty. Family meant lifting each other up. What I didn't understand back then was that jealousy doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it grows quietly, disguised as jokes, sarcasm, and dismissive comments. My brother's resentment showed itself in subtle ways. He'd call me a nerd whenever I studied too long. He'd roll his eyes and say "teacher's pet" whenever my name came up in conversation. When I talked about my goals, he'd laugh and say things like "डिग्री से क्या होगा" or "real life में marks काम नहीं आते." I told myself not to take it seriously. I assumed he was just frustrated with his own situation. Deep down, I believed that blood mattered more than bitterness. I trusted him because he was my brother. That trust would later cost me more than I could have imagined. When I got accepted into a competitive college, it felt unreal, the kind of place people apply to for years and still don't get in. I read the acceptance email over and over again, afraid it might disappear if I blanked. My parents were emotional. My mother cried. My father hugged me with pride written all over his face. My brother congratulated me too, at least verbally, but there was something off about his reaction. His smile didn't reach his eyes. I noticed it, but I ignored it. I was too focused on the future opening up in front of me. After acceptance, everything started moving fast. Emails about orientation, housing details, placement tests, student portals, deadlines stacked on deadlines. I checked my email constantly, afraid of missing something important. One day, casually, I mentioned to my brother how overwhelming it all felt. I joked about how messy my inbox was and how I kept worrying I'd overlook something critical. What I didn't think about was that years earlier, during a moment of trust, I had shared my laptop with him. What I didn't realize was that he still knew how to get in, or that he was waiting for the right moment to use that access against me. That moment came quietly, without drama, without confrontation. One night, while I slept, he logged into my email. He opened every message from the college: orientation schedules, housing confirmations, instructions for student IDs, placement test reminders. One by one, he deleted them. Then he went further. He cleared the trash. He emptied spam. He made sure there was nothing left behind. No notification, no trace. In his mind, it wasn't cruelty. It was correction. He believed that if I walked into college unprepared, people would finally see me as flawed instead of perfect. He thought humiliation would level the playing field. He never considered the damage he was about to cause. At that time, I was unaware that the foundation of my college journey had already been sabotaged. I believed everything was under control. I believed that if something important came up, I would see it. I trusted a system that had already been manipulated by someone I never suspected. That trust, that blindness, is what made the fall harder. Because betrayal hurts differently when it comes from someone who knows your weaknesses, your dreams, and your fears, and chooses to target them anyway. By the time I actually arrived on campus, I still didn't know anything was wrong. I thought confusion was normal. I told myself that everyone must feel lost during the first few days, that maybe orientation wasn't as important as people made it sound. But within hours, that illusion started breaking. Students around me weren't confused. They weren't asking questions. They weren't wandering around looking at maps. They moved with certainty, like they had already been briefed on how everything worked. They talked about orientation sessions as if they were common knowledge. They compared notes, joked about icebreaker activities, complained about long welcome speeches. Every conversation felt like a reminder that I had missed something big, something foundational. The first real wave of embarrassment hit when I walked into a lecture hall early, hoping to blend in quietly. A professor noticed me hovering near the door and asked for my name to check attendance. When I told him, he paused, frowned slightly, and said, "You weren't at orientation, were you?" His tone wasn't angry, it was worse. It was disappointed, like he had already placed me in a category I didn't belong to. He added, "We covered important expectations there. Please make sure you catch up." Nodded, pretending I understood, while my chest tightened. That single interaction set the tone for how I felt people saw me, as someone already behind before I'd even started. As the day went on, the gaps became impossible to ignore. Students had student ID cards that gave them access to buildings I couldn't enter. They knew where to submit forms I had never seen. They talked about placement tests I hadn't taken and emails I had never received. I felt like I had been dropped into the middle of a movie halfway through, expected to understand a plot everyone else already knew. The more I tried to act normal, the more exposed I felt. By the end of the day, confusion had turned into panic. Panic turned into shame, and shame has a way of making you question your own intelligence. The next morning, I went to the administration office. I rehearsed my words before walking in, determined not to sound careless or irresponsible. I explained that I might have missed some communication and asked if they could resend orientation details. The woman behind the desk pulled up my record and stared at the screen longer than expected. Then she looked at me and said, calmly but firmly, "We emailed you several times. Orientation reminders, housing information, placement tests. Everything was sent to the email on file." That sentence landed like a punch. Several times. I thanked her, stepped aside, and immediately opened my phone. I refreshed my inbox again and again. Nothing. I checked spam. Empty. I checked trash. Completely clear. I logged out and logged back in, hoping it was some kind of glitch. Still, nothing. It felt unreal, like reality itself was glitching. According to the system, I had been informed. According to my inbox, none of it had ever existed. When I went back to the desk and explained that my email was empty, the staff member raised an eyebrow, not in disbelief, in doubt. "Are you sure you didn't delete them?" she asked. That question burned more than anything else, because suddenly it wasn't just about missing emails. It was about credibility. It was about whether people believed me at all. For the next few days, I operated in survival mode. I borrowed information from classmates. I asked questions that made me feel small. I stood in lines I didn't know I needed to stand in. Every time someone said, "Didn't you see the email?" I smiled and nodded, even though inside I felt like I was shrinking. At night, alone in my room, I replayed everything in my head. I went over my habits, my routines, my memory. I knew I was obsessive about deadlines. I knew I checked my email constantly. The idea that I had somehow missed every single important message didn't make sense. Slowly, doubt turned outward. The first crack in the truth appeared when I received a security alert about an unfamiliar login. The date caught my attention. The timing lined up exactly with when orientation emails were supposedly sent. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was me on another device. Maybe it was a system error. But something about it felt off. Then there were the small moments that followed, the careless ones. I overheard my brother talking on the phone one evening, laughing, saying, "I told you she'd panic once college started." He didn't know I was listening. Or maybe he didn't care. That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. When I started connecting the dots, my stomach dropped. I checked login activity more carefully. Devices I didn't recognize, locations that weren't mine, patterns that didn't belong to me. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It crept in slowly, painfully, until it became impossible to deny. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a technical error. Someone had deliberately erased my start. And the worst part wasn't the sabotage itself. It was realizing that the person who did it knew exactly how much it would hurt me. The confrontation, when it finally happened, wasn't dramatic. I didn't scream or accuse. I asked simple questions, questions he couldn't answer without slipping. His body language said everything his words tried to hide. The pauses, the defensiveness, the forced laughter. That was the moment betrayal settled fully into my chest. He hadn't just messed with emails. He had watched me walk into confusion, humiliation, and self-doubt, and stayed silent. That silence told me more about his intentions than any confession ever could. That night, I didn't cry immediately. I sat still for a long time, staring at the wall, processing what this meant. It wasn't just about college anymore. It was about trust, about how someone who shared my blood had decided that my failure would make him feel better about himself. I realized something important in that stillness. Reacting emotionally would only give him power. Exploding would make me look unstable. Exposing him too early would shift focus away from my future and onto family drama. I decided then that I wouldn't let his jealousy define my story. Instead of confronting him publicly, I made a quiet decision, one that would shape everything that followed. If he wanted to see me fail, I would make sure my success was undeniable. If he wanted me to look irresponsible, I would become unignorable. And if he thought deleting a few emails could erase my future, I would prove just how wrong he was. After that night, something inside me shifted, not in a dramatic movie-style way, but in a quiet, permanent one. I stopped asking why would he do this and started asking what am I going to do now? I realized that if I stayed stuck in anger, I would be playing the role he had written for me, the confused, emotional mess who couldn't handle pressure. I refused to become that version of myself. Instead, I made a private promise. I would rebuild my college experience piece by piece, without noise, without excuses, and without letting anyone see how deeply I had been shaken. The next morning, I walked into campus with a different mindset. I didn't wait for information to come to me. I hunted it down. I visited academic advising offices, stood in lines, asked direct questions, and took detailed notes. I introduced myself to professors during office hours, not to complain, but to clarify expectations and show seriousness. I explained briefly and professionally that I had experienced a communication issue at the start of the semester and was committed to catching up. Most of them didn't need the full story. What they needed was consistency, and I gave them exactly that. My days became structured to the minute. I created my own orientation, teaching myself systems that everyone else had learned together. I read course outlines carefully, cross-checked deadlines, and built study schedules that left no room for confusion. While others eased into college life, I pushed myself harder. Late nights in the library became routine. Early mornings felt normal. I learned how to focus even when I was exhausted, because failure was no longer an option. Every assignment felt like a test of my resilience, not just my intelligence. Emotionally, the process was heavy. There were moments when I felt deeply alone, watching friend groups form while I kept my distance. There were nights when I wanted to scream about the unfairness of having my start sabotaged before I even had a chance. But I kept those emotions contained. I reminded myself that discipline doesn't mean you don't feel pain, it means you don't let pain control your actions. Slowly, something powerful happened. Professors started noticing my effort. Classmates began asking me for help. The same people who had once seen me as behind now saw me as reliable. As semesters passed, my academic performance spoke louder than any explanation ever could. My grades weren't just good, they were consistently excellent. I volunteered for research projects. I took on extra responsibilities. I showed up prepared, engaged, and focused. With every success, my confidence rebuilt itself, not in an arrogant way, but in a grounded one. I no longer needed external validation. I knew what I had overcome, even if no one else did. At the same time, I didn't forget what had been done to me. I didn't obsess over revenge, but I didn't erase the truth either. Quietly, carefully, I documented everything. I saved login alerts. I noted dates and times. I paid attention to moments when my brother let his guard down. Careless comments, half jokes that hinted at what he had done. I didn't provoke him. I let him reveal himself naturally. Evidence, I learned, is strongest when it's collected calmly and patiently. What kept me going wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. I understood that my brother's actions came from insecurity, but understanding didn't mean excusing. I had stopped expecting fairness from him. Instead, I focused on creating a future so solid that no one could question it. By the time my final year arrived, my name was attached to opportunities I once thought I had lost. Recommendations came easily. Academic recognition followed naturally. And through it all, I remained quiet about my struggle, not because I was ashamed, but because I was strategic. When graduation approached, the reality of what I had accomplished finally settled in. Despite a sabotaged beginning, despite humiliation and isolation, I had built something undeniable. My academic record placed me at the top, summa cum laude. The words felt heavy when I first heard them, not because of pride, but because of contrast. I remembered the version of myself standing lost on campus, wondering if she even belonged there. That version had survived. More than that, she had won. And that's when I knew the timing mattered. Truth has the most power when success has already spoken. I wasn't going to expose betrayal while I was still proving myself. I was going to do it when my achievement made denial impossible. I didn't want sympathy. I wanted clarity. I wanted the narrative to be complete, from sabotage to triumph. And most of all, I wanted my brother to understand that his attempt to erase me had only sharpened my resolve. Graduation day arrived quietly, almost deceptively so. There was no dramatic build-up in my personal life, no signs that anything was about to change. I walked across the stage like thousands of students before me, wearing the same cap and gown, hearing the same applause. But when my name was announced with the words summa cum laude, something shifted. The applause lasted a little longer. Faces in the crowd lit up. My parents stood, pride written clearly on them. My brother clapped too, automatically, almost out of habit. He still didn't know what was coming, and that, strangely enough, gave me peace. A few days later, my family hosted a small gathering. Nothing flashy, just relatives, close family friends, and the familiar noise of people who believed they knew the full story. The mood was celebratory. Compliments floated through the room. People talked about my discipline, my focus, my future. My parents beamed. My brother sat quietly, scrolling on his phone, comfortable in the assumption that the past had stayed buried. I waited. Timing matters when truth is involved. When the moment felt right, I stood up to thank everyone. My voice was steady, not loud, not shaky. I thanked my parents for their support, my professors for their guidance, and my family for believing in me. Heads nodded, smiles widened. Then I paused, just long enough for the room to quiet down. I said, calmly, "What you're celebrating today came after one of the hardest starts of my life." The tone shifted immediately. I continued, "I walked into college completely unprepared, not because I didn't care, but because someone deleted every email my college sent me." A few people looked confused, others leaned forward. Then I said it. That someone was my brother. The silence that followed was heavy. Not awkward, heavy. My parents turned toward him, slowly, like they were processing something they didn't want to believe. My brother's face drained of color. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult him. I stated facts. I mentioned login alerts. I referenced timing. I explained how orientation information had been erased, how trash and spam were deliberately cleared. I kept it brief, factual, and controlled. I wasn't there to argue. I was there to clarify. I ended with one sentence that needed no decoration. Despite that, I still graduated with the highest academic honor. No one spoke for a moment. Then the room reacted in waves. Shock first, then realization. Some relatives exchanged looks, suddenly remembering past comments, past jealousy they had ignored. My parents looked hurt, not angry, just deeply disappointed. My brother stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The truth didn't need dramatics. It had already done its job. What made that moment powerful wasn't exposure alone, it was timing. My success made the truth undeniable. Later that night, away from the crowd, my brother finally spoke. His confidence was gone. He tried to explain it away. He said, "I was angry. I didn't think it would go that far." I looked at him calmly and said, "You didn't just delete emails, you tried to delete my future." The words hung between us. He had no response. I didn't yell, I didn't threaten. I simply made it clear that things had changed. Boundaries were drawn, trust was withdrawn. Some relationships don't end loudly, they end quietly, with clarity. That night, as the house emptied and the celebration faded, I felt something unexpected. Not victory, but closure. I didn't feel lighter because I had embarrassed him. I felt lighter because the truth no longer lived only inside me. I had taken control of my narrative. I had proven, first to myself and then to everyone else, that sabotage doesn't decide outcomes. Perseverance does. When a few days after the family gathering had passed, I found myself alone with my brother. The room was quiet. Kind of quiet that forces you to confront truths you've been avoiding. I didn't want drama and I didn't want excuses. I wanted clarity. I looked at him, really looked at him. Not the brother I grew up with, not the one who played jokes or rolled his eyes, but the person who had deliberately tried to sabotage my future. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with guilt and uncertainty. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't ask for apologies. I just spoke, calmly, firmly. "You didn't just delete emails. You tried to delete my future." He stumbled over words. I was just mad. I didn't think it'd go that far." His voice was small, almost pleading. I shook my head slightly, not with anger, but with disappointment. Being mad doesn't give you the right to control someone else's life. You wanted me to fail so badly that you were willing to make our parents think I was irresponsible. That's not just jealousy, that's betrayal. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle. He didn't respond. There was nothing to respond with. Excuses couldn't erase the evidence, couldn't undo the years of effort, couldn't overwrite the truth that my success had already spoken. I continued, setting boundaries clearly, without drama. No more passwords shared, no more blind trust, no more assuming that because we're family, you can manipulate my life. If we are going to have a relationship from this point on, it will be defined by respect, honesty, and distance where necessary. That was it. Not a lecture, not a threat, a statement of fact. My power wasn't in revenge, it was in control, in calm clarity, in the undeniable truth of my achievements. As I left that conversation, I felt lighter than I had in years. Not because he was guilty or because I had won. I felt lighter because I finally recognized the larger truth. Sabotage, jealousy, and betrayal can come from those closest to us. But perseverance, focus, and discipline, these are ours to command. Nothing anyone does can erase the effort we put into building our future. And nothing, not even betrayal by blood, can stop us from achieving what we are capable of if we stay true to our path. Here's the lesson I want you to take with you, the one I live by every day. Sometimes the hardest obstacles are not external. They come from within the people you trust most. But their attempts to hold you back are powerless against clarity, effort, and resilience. Your success doesn't need witnesses to be real. It only needs you to keep moving forward. And the people who try to trip you on the way, let them watch. Because one day, the very strength they try to destroy will be impossible to ignore. I learned, finally, that real family isn't measured by blood alone. Real family claps when you win. They celebrate your milestones, and they never try to erase your achievements. My brother tried to write a story where I would fail, but I wrote my own story, quietly, relentlessly, and without compromise. And when the world finally saw it, his betrayal was no longer a threat. It was merely a footnote in a story of triumph. So, to anyone listening, protect your boundaries, focus on your path, and never let jealousy dictate your worth. People will try to sabotage you. Sometimes they will be the ones you love most. But success, real, undeniable success, is the kind that no one can delete, no matter how many emails they erase, no matter how much they wish it didn't exist. And that is the final truth. The truth that remains when everything else falls away.